Good afternoon. Why don't we get started? I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council. This is the press conference that I have before a legislative meeting, and tomorrow we will have a legislative meeting. I don't actually have a copy of the agenda with me, but the main item of business for tomorrow is the budget for fiscal year 2024. There are actually about 4 documents that comprise the budget legislation. There's the supplemental, which is the revision to the current year's budget, and we won't be voting on that tomorrow. We'll be voting on that in 2 weeks. But it is integral to what we're doing with the FY24 budget, which is the Local Budget Act, which we will be voting on tomorrow, and then voting a second reading on May 30th. We have budget autonomy, had that for a number of years, and as a result, we pass our budget the same way we pass other legislation. That is 2 readings, and then it's transmitted to Congress for a 30-day congressional layover, and which we actually count the 30 days as 30 days, as opposed to some parliamentarian interpretation, if you get my reference. So that's the way we will be considering the Local Budget Act. A second reading on the Local Budget Act for fiscal year 24 will be the vote on the supplemental revised budget for fiscal year 23. On May 30th, we will also be voting, I think that's when we're voting on the Federal Budget Request Act, which is, it's captioned to Request Act because we don't actually appropriate the federal dollars, such as to the courts or to pretrial services or some of the other agencies that get federal funding, as opposed to the district government. And then we also will be voting tomorrow, first reading on the Budget Support Act. That is a much longer legislative document that mostly contains provisions that are necessary to implement the budget, whether it's the revised budget for fiscal year 23 or the budget for fiscal year 24. The Budget Support Act is often viewed as a vehicle for getting a lot of other legislation through the council. And generally, it's been my practice to resist a lot of measures that aren't directly related to the budget that would be better considered through the normal legislative process of a public hearing and markup, a committee report that explains in detail the rationale for that legislation. So there were a few measures, I'll call them subtitles, that the mayor had in her proposed Budget Support Act that will not be in the what I've circulated today and we're considering tomorrow, because they can be considered separately, and they should be. So that's what we have before us. There is, because it's a legislative meeting, there are a few other measures that are on the agenda, some final readings, and there are several contract approvals. I will stop for a minute on the contract approvals because they, I think, have been of interest to some in the press. The DC public school system, we have found, has been very bad about sending contracts over to the council for approval. The law has required for decades that any contract over $1 million has to come to the council for approval. And we discovered in February that not only was DCPS getting contracts over to us late, but it turns out they were getting contracts over to us not at all. And we will have 2 hearings later this month. One on a bill that I introduced that Councilmember Nadeau is having a hearing on that would take procurement authority away from DCPS and put it with the government's central procurement agency. The other hearing will be an oversight hearing on DCPS contracting and the fact that we've now discovered 36 contracts dating back 3 years that have been executed and paid on that never came to the council for approval. 3 of those contracts are going to be on the agenda tomorrow. They are contracts that have been identified that the vendors have been providing services at a substantial cost to them and have not been paid in months, because now that the council has learned and the chief financial officer has become aware that these contracts were being paid without their having been approved, the payments have stopped being made. And these 3 vendors in particular are struggling. So we will approve those payments. We are not approving the conduct behind those procurements where the council was, where the process was not followed, where the law was not followed. We're not ratifying any of that. We're just simply saying that the chief financial officer can make payments on those contracts. So there will be, that's on non-consent. There'll be a little bit of interesting discussion around that. But I think the district government has to pay on those contracts since we've been receiving services. So getting back to the budget, about an hour ago, we circulated the committee reports and the draft committee prints for the Budget Support Act and the fiscal year 24 budget, which is the Local Budget Act. The highlights with regard to that are that we've made, with this budget, the council will be making substantial restorations and improvements in the areas of education, housing affordability, public safety, downtown recovery, and equity. When we received the proposed budget from the mayor on March 22nd, a number of members, and I want to acknowledge that Councilmember Charles Allen is here. Thank you for being here. And when we received the budget, a number of council members reacted by suggesting that what we were receiving from the mayor was not only what some called an austere budget, but it actually was setting back progress that the government had been making with regard to poverty and social justice in the district. For example, there was no money in the proposed budget for continuing with providing vouchers. That is, no new vouchers for low-income residents to try to reduce homelessness. And there was the council's legislation with regard to, let me see, the access to justice, which provides civil legal services to indigent residents who would be much better served and landlord-tenant court if they had legal representation, or much better served if they had legal representation when seeking entitlement funding, such as from SSI and the federal government. That program, Access to Justice, provides those attorneys. So it was like a double whammy for low income, including the complete elimination of emergency rental assistance. I shouldn't say complete elimination, reducing the funding for next year to single digits, like 8 million, when this year, halfway through the year, we've spent 43 million. That's the context that we got the budget. Austere budget, but a lot of cuts to programs that really make a difference to individuals. The committees held hearings for a little over a month. I have to give a lot of kudos to our budget office, which went over the budget some more, did a lot of scrubbing and analysis. And what I've circulated and what I'll be proposing tomorrow makes significant restorations, I would say reverses many of the problems that were handed to us with the budget. So in the area of housing affordability, the Emergency Rental Assistance Program, which is the program that provides rental assistance to those who are borderline being evicted because they can't pay their rent. It is a program that not only helps people, it helps people stay in their homes, that is housing stability and all that comes with that, but also has an effect in reducing the pressure on our homeless services population. The mayor, this year, to halfway through the year, we'd spent $43 million. The mayor proposed something like 8 million. What I am proposing tomorrow will have $43 million for next year. As I indicated, the mayor had also substantially reduced the Access to Justice program against civil legal services. And we are proposing getting that back up to the current year level. That's 31.6 million. So that's, if I remember correctly, the mayor cut it 60% and we're restoring it 100% to the current year level. I mentioned there was no money in the mayor's proposal for new vouchers. We are adding to the budget over the financial plan $40 million for 230 PSH vouchers, permanent supportive housing vouchers. That's 150 individual, 80 family. That number is a 4-year number, but that continues to make some progress. rather than us falling farther behind with regard to housing for those who need it, who qualify for permanent supportive housing. And together with that is additional FTEs in the Department of Human Services so that we can actually get those vouchers out the door. There's some miscellaneous expenditures that are in the print that I've circulated, such as $150,000 earmarked to a wider circle, which recently has come across thousands of pieces of furniture that with $150,000, they'll actually be able to get to some of these units so that they can be furnished. That's in the area of housing affordability. In the area of public safety, what I've circulated makes no cuts to the MPD budget, Metropolitan Police Department budget. But I do want to note this. The mayor had proposed transferring crime scene search from the forensic lab to the police department. And that had the effect of looking like there was a slight increase to the MPD budget. It was actually not an increase in dollars or an increase in programming. It was just shifting from the forensic lab to MPD, these workers and the budget for them. What I've circulated keeps crime scene search with the independent forensic lab. And so it may look at first blush like there's a cut to MPD, but it is not a cut to MPD. And there's nothing that I'm circulating that would be reducing the MPD budget. The mayor's proposed budget had reduced funding in the current year related to domestic violence programs and victim services programs. In many instances, this was funding that it was tied to grants that had already been announced. And so this was creating a problem. The budget I've circulated reverses that. It's a $9.9 million increase over the mayor's proposal for the Office of Victim Services and OVSJG, Office of Victim Services and Justice Grants Administration. But in addition, there were cuts for FY24 and subsequent years, and we've restored that money as well. It's about $27 million over a 4-year period. So we're restoring victim services domestic violence programs. And of course, these days when there's been a lot of attention to as we've come out of the pandemic, and there's reason to believe that there's been an increase in domestic violence, maintaining these programs, if not increasing them, is important. And then also, although this may not seem immediately related to public safety, we've restored the 26 inspectors that were cut from the Department of Buildings. Those would be inspectors for housing code violations, vacant properties, and illegal construction. In the area of education, the budget that I'm circulating for consideration tomorrow adds almost $24 million to individual DC public schools. This is to the schools themselves. It is not central administration. And this will, I believe, have a direct impact on improving teaching in the classroom, since you can't get much closer to the classroom than the school itself. In addition, there is $15 million added to the charter sector for educator pay, $2.9 million identified in the budget for flexible scheduling. This is trying to address the issue of providing a better work environment for teachers, more planning time, a flexible schedule so that they can do more individualized work with students, or planning time. And this would be time that also there would continue to be instructional work with students. There's been a lot of talk about this, very little action. And with this funding that we've identified, $3.9 million, I'm hopeful that we will see that models for how to do flexible scheduling are developed. And there's some pilot programs with individual schools so that in the following year, we'll see this more broadly implemented. There was $11.2 million in additions and corrections to at-risk funding for both sectors. That's DCPS and the charter sector. And this is recurring dollars, meaning year after year. At-risk funding is the way that we address equity in our public education system, where we provide additional resources to kids who are generally at risk, as correlates with poverty, who have bringing into the classroom some challenges that with additional resources, they can learn and have the same opportunity to achieve their dreams as other kids, as all kids in our school system. And what we found with the mayor's proposed budget, that the chancellor had taken the at-risk funding we added last year and simply embedded it into the school budgets, meaning that it was no longer supplementing public education or general education, but rather was supplanting dollars that had been used for general education. And it's important, it has been the council's intent that at-risk funding supplements education. And that's what we do with this budget at the rate of about $11.2 million. And then the University of the District of Columbia will receive about $8.5 million additional to its subsidy. And that includes establishing a new social worker pipeline. This is actually an endeavor that UDC is pursuing right now, but we're putting the funding in so that when they get the accreditation, they have the dollars to provide that degree program. I mentioned downtown recovery. There are two ways of looking at downtown recovery. There's been a lot of talk about some strategies that, if you think about, are actually long-term, take years to effect. I am one who's argued that downtown recovery needs to be more immediate, that there need to be some quick benefits. So for example, there's funding in the budget for safe corridors. That's to address in a more focused way public safety in the downtown. There's a strategy to try to encourage more nightlife activities, such as through large capital grants from the Commission on Arts and Humanities to some of the theaters or museums, venues that attract people downtown. There's money that's been added to the budget for retail grants for downtown to help stimulate more retail activity. The circulator routes that the mayor had proposed to cut are restored with this budget. That was 3 routes that she had proposed to be eliminated, and instead they're restored with this budget. And then there is, over the 4-year financial plan, $46 million to begin the overnight buses. That's 13 bus routes, the busiest bus routes. And right now there's not overnight service on those routes. And with this budget, that will start in January. And the routes, it's kind of interesting. There are a lot of those routes are east of the river, and a number of them are downtown. And so that's part of our strategy as well for recovery. Finally, I want to note that if you look at the budget in terms of from a perspective of equity, there's several ways of looking at what we've done in that regard. One of the most obvious, but it's a very long-term strategy, is baby bonds. So that had been proposed for elimination in the mayor's budget. I want to thank Council Member McDuffie, who worked hard to restore that program. This is an investment in kids' future. The idea behind it is that a child who's born in poverty in the district and remains a resident in the district for 18 years, at 18, will have roughly $18,000 plus whatever interest is accrued to be able to use for higher education or to start a business, certain wealth building activities or investments. Too often what we look at is how we can, like with rental assistance, give $1,000 here or $1,000 there. What if we gave $18,000 at one time to somebody who is a young adult and has their whole future ahead of them? That could be, and I think will be, a game changer. The challenge there is that most people don't have the patience to wait 18 years, meaning that this year what we saw was that this was an easy program to eliminate, but it really is an investment in trying to change the arc of poverty in this city and provide an opportunity for kids born in poverty to get out of that cycle. So I mentioned that first and foremost when looking at this in terms of equity, the overnight buses, which I talked about, are heavily used by lower income residents, not exclusively, of course, but that's another way that we are looking at equity. And then what I'd mentioned earlier about housing affordability, which is really geared to those who are struggling at the margins and or in poverty. So in those different ways, this budget also is mindful of our need to address equity in this city. There are a lot more details to what I circulated, but those are the highlights. And with that, I'm happy to take questions. Yes.
Hi, Chairman Adam Tuss from NBC4. Can you talk about the K Street Transitway project? Obviously, that's been controversial. I see there's $8 million in there to fund the design of it, but isn't that project already designed? And where does the funding stand right now?
I would say poorly designed. So, and I think also the timing is problematic. We're trying to bring back downtown. We're trying to get more retail activity and get folks downtown. And to think about it, you tear up K Street for a couple of years, and that actually has the opposite effect. But really, the most important thing is pretty widely, there's the view that the plan, which was developed 10 years ago, before the pandemic, before commuter patterns changed, needs to be looked at again and refreshed. And so I think the money we have in there for planning, and it's more than when it came out of committee, it was I think $1 million. So we've increased it. It's equal to what was spent before. It's probably more than what's necessary because we're not looking at just starting from scratch. But there is a need to refresh the plan and have it reflect where we are post-pandemic with commuter patterns, where we are post-pandemic with regard to alternative modes to motor vehicles.
That's an over $100 million project to complete it. At least that's what
Yes.
is out there. Was that money allocated toward it? I mean, the mayor seemed to suggest that money was already set aside for it.
We had, there was something like $115 million in the budget for it. We've left, I want to say like 5 million, although you said 7, so maybe that's the correct amount. Yes, when the mayor comes back with a refreshed plan, working with the property owners downtown so that she has their support and not just their press conference support, but their behind the scenes support as well. And working with the council and the council's committee on transportation, getting all that work, collaborative work done. And I expect that she can put it back in the budget next year and the council will support it.
Right now, that money's not there.
Correct. Correct, just the planning dollars. Yes, Lou.
Shows that among the things that you restored for the council, you're proposing is the festival fund.
Yes.
But you may know that there was an issue that came up in Councilman McDuffie's committee, where in order to restore the baby bond funds that you say were important, they cut the festival fund.
Correct.
So were you able to resolve that, it
Correct.
seems?
Yes, so the money was put back. It was a cut that we were able to reverse. Recognizing that that festival fund is used to support a number of events such as the Pride Festival. So that money is restored.
Sufficient funds in the budget, you think, for both then?
Yeah, although I think the government overcharges, but that's a different issue. I'm not the executive.
Just real quick to continue on what Adam was talking about the K Street Transitway. I noticed that in the Budget Support Act, you have language specifically prohibiting the mayor from using any funding to do any sort of construction on K Street. Do you just not trust that she wouldn't follow the council when you guys say we don't want to put any money into this? Do you think she could, find sneaky ways to get money otherwise to actually start construction?
Trust is a.
Do you not trust the executive is what I'm asking?
Trust is a powerful word, and I would never go there. But I do think that the council is serious that we support the idea of a K Street Transitway. that WMATA, among others, has made it clear that this will be important to its improvements to bus routes. And there are a number of multimodal opportunities for K Street that ought to be implemented. So we're serious about supporting that, but get it right. And that's what that budget subtitle does.
Chairman Ted Oberg from News 4 as well. The cuts to DCPS, did you restore both the money to schools and the cuts at central administration?
No.
So the cuts at central administration are still in effect.
Yeah.
You've moved the money from there in back to the schools.
Yeah, doesn't that make sense that we want the funding to go into the classroom? We don't want to see Central continue to get larger and happier and fatter and yes, but do we look carefully at the cuts? There's been some pushback. You know, we get this from all the executive agencies. When we take a dollar here or a dollar there, the sky's falling, the Washington Monument's going to collapse. And so we look very carefully at what we moved from Central to the individual schools. And I'm confident that Central has the ability to continue what it needs to do. I mean, it provides important work supporting the system overall.
And does this then fully comply with schools first? And what message are you trying to send to the
Yes.
executive with that?
It does. So I appreciate you referring to the legislation we adopted, schools first in budgeting. And what I'm putting before the council tomorrow complies fully with the schools first in budgeting law.
You're sending to the mayor by doing so?
Is that we're going to fund schools first and Central second. And Central is, believe me, they've got a lot of money. In fact, I think the schools DCPS's budget goes up something like $60-70 million. You know, with the budget that we got in March, DCPS's budget goes up again. I think it's $60-70 million, but 80 schools were being cut. We're being cut, and Schools First says no. Schools get the same budget next year that they had this year, plus the increase of 5% that was in the UPSFF.
You regret the animosity between you and the schools on this year. Many people have suggested this, and I have none of this history. But people that we've talked to suggest that this is one of the most acrimonious years dealing with schools budgeting. Do you regret any of that?
Yeah, I would say yeah. But you know, the challenge has been that the council passed a law, and the chancellor came before the committee of the whole and testified that he had no intent to follow the law this year. I'm hopeful that when he said he had no intent to follow the law this year, that means he will follow it next year. We've also had a challenge, which is not budget, but these contracts that I mentioned before. And the fact that there are 36 contracts that most of which have run their course and been completed, and millions of dollars. I think it's $260 million total for those contracts, and never came to the council for approval. I regret that it's viewed as animosity. But just to give you a sense, Anacostia High School, with what we are considering, it will get $702,000 additional dollars next year. $702,000 additional dollars. A Bard the high school, that's the college high school, a new school. It's a beautiful building, a lot of excitement around it, was cut. And with the restoration of funding, it will get $648,000 additional dollars. That's meaningful. And even where the amount is less, I recently was talking with an elementary school teacher who for the current year got something like $34,000 in the at-risk concentration weight. Doesn't seem like a lot. She was really very appreciative because that money enabled her to go out and purchase reading curricula to focus on and improve reading proficiency in the elementary school students. So these dollars make a difference.
Chairman, off-topic question. We just came from a press conference with Mayor Bowser on proposing legislation for crime reduction. Just wanted to get your thoughts if you've talked to the mayor's office about this legislation that's been proposed, and do you think that there'll be pushback from council And is this an effort to appease the Republicans on the Oversight Committee as you appeared before them a
Yeah,
few
I
weeks
love
back?
these compound questions, so let's see if I can remember. First of all, I haven't seen the legislation. Second, she or her administration has not briefed me on it. So there's not too much I can say in that regard. I know that part of the issue that she's concerned about is pretrial release. And when I chaired the Judiciary Committee 10, 15 years ago, that was a major concern. It's an important aspect of public safety when the police have probable cause to arrest somebody. We need to take seriously whether that person is of such a threat to the community or risk of flight that they should be held. So I welcome the opportunity for us to look at that. But with regard to the particular details, haven't been briefed, haven't seen it, so I can't comment.
And is this?
About appeasing Republicans, that was
Yes.
the other part. I'm not going to speculate on that. As you know, Councilmember Allen and I testified before the same committee a couple months ago. I don't really think that the committee was interested in our answers. I think they came in with their scripted questions, and if you saw the clip that made it to one of the late night shows, it was clear that particular congressman was not paying any attention to the answers that Councilmember Allen was giving. But I think it's important that they've given the mayor an opportunity to present, and we have a very good story, and I think that nothing but good will come out of it from the standpoint of the district, because we have an opportunity to answer the questions if they want to hear the answers and present our story.
I mean, do you expect any pushback from council on what she's proposing at all?
Oh, I don't know. I can't say because I haven't seen it.
All right, real quick on that and then back to the budget. One thing that the mayor said, or the mayor's people are saying, is that they'd like to get this bill, this package of ideas passed before the summer. I'm curious, the summer recess, I'm curious.
Yeah, that would be difficult because there ought to be a hearing. There really ought to be a hearing and an opportunity for testimony. These are complicated issues. On the one hand, if somebody commits a crime, we want them held, we want them locked up. On the other hand, there is a presumption under our Constitution that a person is innocent until found guilty, till proven guilty. So you have to balance the perceived public safety interest with the constitutional right of liberty. Finding that right balance is complicated enough that there ought to be a hearing, there ought to be an opportunity for public comment and for us to get it right. And before the recess means, what, 6 weeks? That's not enough time. I will add this. I don't know a single member of the council who's not concerned about public safety. And if there are opportunities to make the city safer, we want them.
This is a question from demonstrators outside. What is in your budget on the pay equity fund?
Yes,
Pay equity fund?
yes.
It's in there?
Well,
What
there's
was
got to be
happened
more
to
to
it?
that question. There's an educator equity, educator pay equity fund. And that's, we had a hearing on the budget. There were questions specifically around that, and it's funded based on what the demand has been.
Have you had conversations with the mayor about what your overall proposal? And do you think it's a budget that if passed as you proposed, she'll sign it?
I have no reason to think she wouldn't sign it. I did have some conversations last week with her administration.
And now back to the budget. One of the criticisms that the mayor had in her letter that she sent to council a couple of weeks ago was, these kind of budgeting gimmicks that you guys are using, that it's not responsible, that it's unsustainable.
And you liked all that rhetoric?
It's not that I liked it. I'm just saying it's what she said. One point could be you're looking at you've restored funding for the circulator buses.
One of us has provoked something.
Okay, fair enough. So one point is that you've restored funding for the circulator routes, the 3 circulator routes, but you said that's just for 1 year, right?
Yes.
So doesn't that fall into her kind of definition of gimmicky or unsustainable? I mean, you guys are doing something that's just you're gonna run into the same problem next year, aren't you?
Yeah, help me here. So she
I'm not here to
proposed,
help you. This is on you.
so she proposed zeroing it out, and we said, let's keep it for a year and figure it out. I'm not sure that's the same thing. It's actually like, let's sort of figure this out, as opposed to just suddenly giving it the axe.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, just one quick follow-up on the crime issue. If and when the criminal code bill comes back to the council
Yeah.
after congressional action, community activists have been raising a question, and I'm not sure how you may feel about it, but about the obvious increase in juvenile-related crime. Some community people have complained for a long time that under the current statute, the disposition of any of the juvenile cases cannot be publicly disclosed. No one wants to disclose the names or the identity of a juvenile charged in a crime, but some are asking for whether the council might change the statute so that the disposition of a crime, whatever it may be, committed by a juvenile after it goes through the process of the juvenile courts, could that be publicly released?
Let me see, how do I want to answer that? The practice with regard to juvenile justice in the district is not much different than that in the 50 states. And that is that juveniles are treated differently than adults when it comes to criminal activity. And the theory behind the juvenile justice system is that the children are young enough that they have an opportunity to correct their lives, and also that their decision-making process is not as refined, as developed as for adults. And that suggests, therefore, that just the way we approach them should be more rehabilitative than punitive. Now, that's the theory behind juvenile justice systems. And as I said, the district isn't different than any of the states. Part of that rehabilitation is that there's confidentiality around the identities of juveniles. It's not a secret to law enforcement. So when a kid gets picked up, police can see whether this is the first time or the 8th time that kid's been picked up. So there's not a confidentiality there, and that's important in terms of understanding how to punish or approach rehabilitation for that kid, assuming that he's or she is adjudicated as involved. That's the term that's used. So if the question is, should we get rid of confidentiality? I mean, my answer would be, I don't think so. And I don't know that that actually improves anything, because those who need to know, such as police, already have access to the information. It's not a secret. And if that kid's to have an opportunity to turn himself or herself around, it's better that their past becomes their past.
And what the activists tell me is they are not by any means asking that the identity of the juvenile in any way be revealed. Only what happens to the disposition after the adjudication of that case, of a specific case. Someone is, if there's a carjacking or a assault, armed robbery, and that sort of thing.
That gets a little bit more complicated. And as you noted, the criminal code, the revised criminal code, is still before the council. And I can't remember. I don't think that the work on that involved too much juvenile justice, but as we look at it, we'll be looking at the whole justice system. So I'm not trying to suggest where we should end up there. And I do know from my work in the past with the Judiciary Committee that some of these questions are worth always taking another look at to make sure that we're not in any way hindering public safety or a kid's opportunity for rehabilitation.
following up on the public safety, do you generally believe, I think one of the mayor's proposal is that strengthening penalties for violent crime, gun possession and strangulation are some of the priorities that she laid out today. The second half of that is, do you believe that too many people are released on pretrial release in the district these days?
Well, let me see. If the mayor has a proposal, we absolutely should look at the proposal. Do I think sentences should be strengthened? Just speaking generally, not specifically, and I haven't seen a proposal. There could be some sentences where there ought to be stronger or lengthier sentences possible, but generally, we, meaning government, we look to longer sentences as if that's the solution to criminal activity. And the research is pretty clear that there isn't that effect. So it sounds good. The effect isn't the same. What I've said over and over again is one thing that would have a more direct effect on crime would be increasing the case closure rate. The closure rate for homicides is, in my view, appallingly too low. The closure rate for robberies is appallingly too low. Increase the closure rate. That's not a matter of the length of the sentence, but actually getting people arrested and convicted. I subscribe to the theory of swift and certain justice. You can.
And then on pretrial release, in your view, are too many people?
I'd like to see the statistics before I answer that, and I haven't seen the statistics. How many people are reoffending when they're on release, pretrial release? So it's easy to say that a person who's been arrested is guilty and ought to be held pretrial. That actually works against the Constitution, which says you're innocent until proven guilty. I mean, that's just a reality in our society. And but we do have under the law, under the current law, that a person who is arrested, that if the court at the preliminary hearing agrees, if the U.S. attorney makes the argument that the person is a risk to public safety, then they can be held. So it's worth looking at that standard, whether we have the right balance. And it's also, I think we would benefit from the statistics rather than just simply me or somebody else standing at a podium and saying too many people are released pre-trial. Let's look at the statistics. That will answer the question.
Chairman, just back to some of the transportation stuff, when it comes to, I guess, revitalizing downtown, getting downtown back to where it was or where it could be going in the future, it sounds like you and the mayor are very far apart. Is that an accurate way of describing that in terms of the transportation projects or what needs to happen next?
Well, I don't know, to be honest with you. So I've heard some statements secondhand attributed to the mayor. We're not killing K Street Transitway. We're saying refresh this plan and work with people and get broader support. Is that very far apart?
Well, I'm not just talking about that project. I'm talking about overall. I mean, where would you guys say you are?
Well, let's
when
take
we're talking about
the
that?
circulator. The mayor proposed to cut it. We are restoring it. I guess that is very far apart, but I didn't know that that was characteristic of our relationship. The fare-free buses, we pulled back on that because the Metro Board said there really ought to be more of a regional discussion. And my response was, well, you know, if you say to us, give us a year to talk so we can come back in a year, then I don't know that that's unreasonable to have a regional conversation. So I don't know that that's very far apart. Can you give some other examples?
No, I'm curious what you think needs to happen next. Like, I think in terms of this larger discussion on what happens with cities, how you bring people back, the situation that you guys are in, you know, are you guys talking about this stuff?
Well, I think
You made a comment that you don't want to rip up K Street because I'm assuming you think that'll prevent people from coming back. I'm just generally curious, picking your brain to what you think.
Well, let's deal with, I prefer the phrase jackhammering K Street. So we have in this budget, it's a small amount of money. It's like $1 million for business interruption relief for the retail businesses on Connecticut Avenue north of DuPont Circle, because there's a street rehabilitation project and there is huge concern among that business community, that the work of the streetscape improvements, which is less intense than what's proposed for K Street, will disrupt and seriously hurt those businesses. Why would that be the reality on I shouldn't say Upper Connecticut, why would that be the reality on Connecticut Avenue, but not the reality on K Street? So that's what I was referring to. Work with the business community, the property owners on K Street, on downtown, about how we can do K Street and minimize what the disruptive effects may be on those businesses. I don't think that's unreasonable, and that's all I'm saying in that regard. The broader issue of recovery, it's my view that downtown, and to ensure that it recovers, we need to look at some quick actions to bring people downtown. So there's nothing wrong with a long-term strategy that says we want 15,000 new residents downtown. That's people who are going to be living and walking around, walking their dogs downtown. There's nothing wrong with that. But that's going to take years. And downtown needs to recover now, not in 2033. And so what are the quick fixes? The quick fixes are fixes that activate, to bring people downtown. The barbecue battle, except we can't do the barbecue battle on every street and every weekend, but things that bring people downtown. The theaters and museums off of the mall. That brings people downtown. Addressing concerns, real or perceived, with regard to public safety. So people are comfortable downtown. It's great when we see people walking around, and the more people walk around, the more retail stores we're going to have, because there's more customers for retail opportunities. And the more people walking around, the more restaurants we'll have. The more restaurants and the more retail, then we'll have even more people. So that's what has to happen. And that has to happen, in my view, as quickly as possible. Otherwise, we run the risk that downtown feels more, I want to say, isolated and less attractive, and that's the wrong direction for us to go.
Council Chairman.
Yes, sir.
If you can just talk about what the budget tomorrow looks like in terms of rectifying that conflict with the charter school teachers and their compensation.
Sure. So the mayor had proposed something like $59 million in the budget for charter schools, educator pay. Council members made it clear when we got the proposal that they wanted that money to go to the educators as opposed to, what do I want to say, the white shirts in the charter schools. And but the charter schools agreed they wanted the money to go to educators. The mayor's proposal was limited to teachers, and there are other individuals who are active with educational activities like teacher aides, counselors. And so what we're looking at tomorrow is $15 million on top of what the mayor proposed, and broader applicability than just teachers. So it's still less money by far than what for the charter sector than what the DCPS sector is getting.
And as far as charter school teachers unionizing, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's not part of the budget tomorrow, but I support the right of workers to organize. That's my own view, but I think other council members agree.
Another budget related one, but not the FY24, the FY23 supplemental. The one issue that some folks have raised, some activists have raised, is the concerns about this $20 million for excluded workers that the mayor is now repurposing for other uses. How come this money was never spent to begin with? And is there anything the council could do or would do to get that money back to, I mean, you guys worked to get that money to excluded workers to begin with, but now it's been shuffled aside.
The money was put in the FY23 budget by the council, and I'm deeply disappointed that the mayor just disregarded what the council intended. It's what should have happened was last fall, the committee with oversight should have looked at what Events DC's plan was to get that money out the door. Money didn't get out the door. The mayor, I don't want to say this as if I prove, but the mayor has the right to take money that hasn't been spent and try to repurpose it. That's part of her proposal to the council. In the end, we make the appropriation, but she can make the proposal, and that's what she did. I think it's unfortunate because the prospect was put out there and then she pulls it back.
So you seem to be deeply disappointed often these days when it comes to the mayor, in the sense
I
of the
think that
relationship
I have-
between you and the mayor and the executive and the legislative, whether it's DCPS contracts, it could be.
I don't think I said deeply disappointed over the contracts. I'm outraged about the contracts.
You're either outraged or disappointed or saddened or frustrated, or, I can go on with the synonyms here. But when is there a
Start being
possibility for
happy.
the legislative branch to exercise a little more muscle here and say, listen, we said you should do this. We'd like you to do it. We said $20 million should be spent on excluded workers. You need to spend it on that and not just sit on it for 8 months and then use it for something else. I mean, I'm just trying to get a sense of whether the legislative branch, it's co-equal branches of government here, right?
Well, if you were a student of American history and American government, you would know that this is an age-old tension between the legislative and the executive branches. The legislative branch appropriates. The executive can't spend unless we appropriate the dollars, but that doesn't mean that the executive has to spend it, which is a problem. And you'll see this over and over with legislatures and executives across the country, including the federal government. So we can't make the mayor spend. But what tools do we have available to us? So let's see, what comes to mind? How about schools first? So there we said we want schools budgeted first. And the chancellor chose not to do that. The budget we got did not do that. 80 schools are cut. So we have the power of appropriation. We're fixing it with the bill tomorrow. How many questions do I get about, oh, what damage are you doing to Central? Oh, this could be horrible for how the whole system works. You see the grief we get when we try to actually muscle our way through to what we mean? But I do intend to muscle my way through to what we mean with regard to schools.
The mayor had a rally for the downtown transit way and has and there's visible support for her position. Are there others that you can say support your position on not going forward with it today?
Well, actually, I received a letter yesterday from half dozen different organizations saying that they absolutely agreed stepping back, refreshing the plan, and then moving forward. But I kind of alluded to it earlier, and I don't think I want to emphasize the point. There's what has been said publicly at press conferences and what has been said privately.
And do you have any comment on the housing part of the mayor's proposal to bring people downtown, specifically the affordable housing position she's taking?
Generally, what she has proposed in terms of getting more housing downtown, I agree with. Mr. Rice, you will recall that 20, 30 years ago, you and I were together in the trenches trying to get housing downtown. There ought to be a mixed use, sorry to out you. There needs to be mixed use in residential downtown. I don't agree with proposals to change the Height Act, but we can get more residential downtown without changing the Height Act. So generally, I agree with that. My only concern in that regard is that that can't be the only strategy. Not saying that the mayor's saying that's the only strategy, but that we have to look at more immediate, quick benefits for activating downtown. I can't emphasize that enough.
So as you know, last week, Teacher Appreciation Day, many DCPS teachers learned that.
Did I see you at the rally?
Nah, I was at another thing, unfortunately. But you might have spoken on this
I would have
already.
given you an exclusive interview.
It's true. That's true. But just in terms of that, I just wanted to get your thoughts on this. It seems like you and DCPS and the deputy mayor, just when it comes to issues of transparency and compensation, there's a lot of push and pull. I just wanted to get your thoughts on, after this long protracted negotiation process, when teachers thought that they were going to get what they needed, it seems like the funds didn't come through once again. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think what you're referring to is the retroactive pay that was supposed to go out the door this week, and it's not going out the door this week. I'm sorry, Martin, but I'm disappointed to use that word. I don't know all the details behind that. I don't think the executive is acting in bad faith. I totally get it that the teachers, they waited, 4 years for the contract, and they'd like to get the pay that they're entitled to under the contract. So the government should move quickly to do that. I do know it's a time-consuming process. We had a hearing, Councilmember Bonds and I had a hearing in January before the council approved the contract, where we discussed the payment schedule. And it was clear at that time that it's complicated to get those dollars, to get those payments done. I mean, there are thousands of employees who are getting checks, and it's just complicated since it goes back several years in terms of the pay. And that's not to excuse the delays, but I don't think that there's bad faith.
Looking ahead, staying with DCPS, but looking ahead to the contract battle, do you see the contract issue? Do you see a way that DCPS is entitled to keep procurement authority, or have they so violated their trust that you believe it should be stripped?
I think that DCPS's conduct is scandalous. And I believe that there are several investigations. I hesitate to characterize the severity of the investigations because I just don't know, and the investigators won't share. But I'm pretty sure the Inspector General is looking at this, and there clearly was significant wrongdoing. And just for starters, the obvious is that the Home Rule Act has required for decades that contracts over $1 million have to come to the council. And, you know, if it comes to the council a month late, 2 months late, that's pretty bad. But as I said before, there are numerous contracts that never came to the council. And the fact that payments were made on those contracts, in my view, raises serious questions about the financial controls in our government.
About intent. Do you believe that there could be any non-malicious intent? 36 contracts, $260 million. It is not a minor oversight. Do you believe they intended to mislead you?
It's hard to answer that question honestly. I don't think the chancellor was aware of the decision not to inform the council. It doesn't get him off the hook because he is the head of the agency. I don't know what level of employee made the decision either to not care or to intentionally not submit to the council. And I don't know if it was one employee or more than one employee. So it's really hard to judge based on how little we've been told, which is a reason why we're having the hearing. But there, as I said, there are some investigations.
One last one on a really minor note on the inspectors. At a time when we're trying to build new housing, the Department of Buildings, can they afford 26? I know you restored the funding, but how in your mind could they justify cutting 26 inspectors? Is it just we need to cut somewhere?
How could they justify the cut?
Yeah, I mean,
how could they justify a lot of the cuts that were in the budget that we were given? And they were justified that it's an austere budget, but we looked at the same numbers that the executive had, and we were able to restore not only the inspectors, but the other programs I mentioned, such as ERAP at 43 million, access to justice at 31 million, permanent supportive housing vouchers at 40 million, schools, public education. So the I don't know that I really want to try to speculate how they could justify that. I feel like there was something more I wanted to say on the contracts. I've circulated an amendment nature of a substitute for one of the contracts. The documents we got last week, I believe, were circulated last week. One of the contracts, the Attorney General can't even give a legal sufficiency because they can't find the contract. That's how bad it is. Correct.
You don't have the contract?
We don't have the contract.
They still want you to vote on it.
Well, we're going to authorize the payments. We're going to authorize the chief financial officer to make payments, but we're not ratifying the contract because we don't have it. Yeah, that's pretty bad.
So why pay it?
Well, there is a theory in the law that when one receives services, they have to compensate for those services. And we could take the approach that the vendor has to go to court. I believe it's called a quantum merit claim. And why would we do that? There's not a dispute whether the services were received. At least I'm not aware of a dispute. So, but the legislation we have is very specific that we're approving the CFO paying the invoices. I believe the services are related to special education. That's how messed up it is. And when we had the hearing in February, we knew of more contracts that hadn't come to the council than the chancellor knew. So. But when we press hard with our oversight, we get pushed back why we're causing trouble and why we shouldn't do what we're doing. And that's part of the process. It looks like I've stunned everybody into no more questions. That's a good thing. We have the meeting will be a committee of the whole. I think all the action on the budget will take place at the committee of the whole. And that meeting is supposed to start at 11, assuming that no members come to me with a last minute budget problem. The meeting will start pretty close to 11 and then be followed by the legislative meeting. The contracts are at the legislative meeting. We will vote at the legislative meeting on the budget, but as I said, all the action will be at the committee of the whole. I don't believe there's a breakfast tomorrow. So you're on your own for waffles. Thank you all very much. See you tomorrow.